Hello, this is part part two of a three-part discussion of Charles Kimball's book, Truth Over Fear. This is a picture of the front of the book. My books have been loaned out and don't have a copy of the book right now. At any rate, in the first section of this, we talked about perceptions of Islam. We talked about the five pillars of Islam. We talked a little bit about Muhammad. We talked a lot about the similarities between the Judeo-Christian religion and Islam. We also talked about the major differences. In this video, we're going to talk more about how the perception of Islam as a violent and evil religion and Muhammad as an evil person came to be, how these perceptions, these misperceptions, evolved over centuries, and how they became ingrained in our understanding of Islam as a religion and the Muslims as people. And hopefully, this will, as is stated as the purpose of the book, will be able to dispel a lot of the misperceptions and the basic lies about Islam and the Muslim people. We'll also start to talk a little bit about where we are today and how we've gotten to our point in time today. So where we left off in the last video was where Muhammad had set up shop in Medina and adopted this charter of Medina, and all of the way that defined how Muslims would interact and live with their non-Muslim neighbors, and how over the centuries in areas that were majority of the population was Muslim, these other religions peacefully coexist. So again, get back to the purpose of today's video is to talk more about how we got to where we are today and our misperceptions of Islam. And it really starts in 632 when Muhammad passed away, and there was a position created called a caliph. That's C-A-L-I-P-H. And the caliph assumed all the duties of Muhammad, and those, as you remember, are political, economic, military, as well as religious duties that Muhammad had. The one major difference between the caliph and Muhammad was that Muhammad was regarded as a prophet, and the caliphs are not. The first caliph was a man named Abu Bakr, and he ruled for 2 years and really consolidated power in the Arabian Peninsula. The next caliph was named Umar, U-M-A-R, and the Muslims greatly expanded their military and political control in the region, as well as extending out into North Africa towards Spain, and then towards the east, towards all the way to India and Pakistan. By 732, the Muslims controlled North Africa, all of Spain, and all of the lands to the east, all the way to the current day India and Pakistan, a very large area. Contrary to the beliefs at the time, there was very little historical evidence that there were forced conversions anywhere along these conquests. People in these areas were illiterate. If they were, basically they saw Islam as an extension of the Jewish and Christian traditions. The first really coherent critique of Islam was from a Christian theologian named John of Damascus. And this man died in 750, and he wrote that Islam was not so much a new religion as it was an extension or or a perversion of an older one, basically Judaism and Christianity. John Damascus noted key points that linked Muslims with Christians. We talked about this before, the monotheism. That there's one God and he is the creator of the entire universe. That God reveals himself and reveals his what he would have us do through prophets. The religions, including Islam, believe in the virgin birth of Jesus. They believe in the presence of spiritual beings like angels and demons. They believe in the immortality of the soul, the existence of heaven and hell, and the importance of good works and care for the poor. Remember when we talked about the 5 pillars of Islam, this was a very important pillar, looking after those less fortunate in the society. The major points of divergence between Islam and the Judeo-Christian, especially the Christian tradition, Muslims deny the divinity of Jesus. They deny the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus, and they outright reject the doctrine of the Trinity. The Christians and Jews living in these predominantly Muslim areas were called dhimmis, Dhimmis, which translated means protected people. If you remember going back to that charter of Medina, the non-Muslims were protected by that charter. These other religions were allowed to practice their religion, and they were allowed to have jurisdiction over their own religious tradition and the religious matters in their community. They did have to pay a higher tax, and the Christians were not allowed to proselytize or try to convert non-Christians. In Europe, however, as they watched this expansion of Islam through Africa into Spain, and then on the other direction into Turkey and heading towards Eastern Europe, felt threatened. They saw Islam as a threat to their economy as well as to their religion. They felt threatened that the Muslims denied the divinity of Jesus and felt that their religion and their very lives as Christians were threatened. And the Muslims were in control of the Holy Land. And this led in 1095 to Pope Urban II of the Roman Catholic Church to call for the First Crusade. And these were, if you read about the Crusades, they're usually described as holy wars to try to reclaim the Holy Land from the evil Muslims. And there was actually more to it than that. There was economic reasons for the Crusades. The Muslims now controlled all the trade routes between East and West. There was obviously geographical threat to the sovereignty of the kingdoms and all in Europe. And so there was more than just a religious reason for the Crusades. So how did this view of Islam from Western Christians, basically European Christians, how did this come about? It's stated that Islam is a product of the devil or a product of the Antichrist, again, denying the divinity of Jesus. It was claimed that Muslims worshipped Muhammad as a god, which is not true. As you remember, Muhammad was regarded as a great prophet. In fact, the final prophet in the line from Abraham to Moses to Jesus and on to Muhammad. There were disparaging portrayals of Muhammad himself in these areas in the Middle Ages, where Muhammad was portrayed in a very poor light, both politically as well as personally. He was regarded as a fake, as a womanizer, a charlatan, and basically a tool of the devil. These portrayals actually continue on into today. The Satanic Verses was a book released in the 1980s, and it had a negative portrayal of Muhammad. There have been series of cartoons that have been published in various publications in Europe in more recent times that portray Muhammad in a negative light. Um, and it's important to understand that Muslims do not portray Muhammad or God in any way, as opposed to Christian art is full of images of Jesus and God and all those sorts of things. That does not happen in Islam. If you go into a mosque, there are no pictures of God or pictures of Muhammad. So not only do they not like, they resent negative pictures of Muhammad, but they basically don't want any pictures of Muhammad. In Dante's Inferno, Muhammad and his son-in-law were portrayed very poorly. They were displayed in the ninth chasm of hell, which was reserved for the worst of the worst, and basically the Antichrist or heretics. Muhammad was pictured as receiving a very severe punishment at with a sword. And it's a very negative portrayal of Muhammad in Dante's Inferno. In contrast to this, we have Francis of Assisi, who was a monk in Italy, and he was a Christian leader who challenged these popular assumptions of Islam as well as Muhammad. He actually went so far as to become involved during the Crusades. He actually crossed battle lines and met with one of the sultans on the battlefield and tried to reach an accord. Apparently, there was a very cordial meeting between the two. There was another man named Nicholas of Cusa who lived from 1401 to 1464. He is somewhat regarded as the first comparative religion scholar, if you will. He offered a positive view of the variety of human religions, and he worked to engage issues of religious pluralism in general, and he tried to reconcile the differences between Christians and Muslims. The prevailing view, however, was really represented by Martin Luther, who had very limited access to the Quran, never actually read the Quran. But again, living in a region of Europe that the Muslims were becoming very, very close geographically to and location, felt threatened and reacted really violently and very much stressed the fact that Muslims denied the divinity of Jesus and really representing Muhammad as the Antichrist. And those very negative views prevailed. The views of Nicholas of Cusa and Francis of Assisi were really minority views that went by the wayside, and the majority opinion regarding Islam and Muslims was the negative ones, as espoused by Martin Luther. These lasted all the way through the Middle Ages up to the time of the Enlightenment period, when people began to trust science and logical thinking and the scientific method over religious thinking and miracles and traditional religious thought. Interestingly, one of the Enlightenment thinkers that really softened his view towards Islam was Thomas Jefferson, who was very much interested in Islam and basically in the Muslim people as very creative people. During this time, the Middle Ages, the Muslims were making great advances in architecture and mathematics and science, much more so than the Europeans, and Jefferson recognized that. And the concept of separation of church and state seems to have evolved possibly from Jefferson's study of Islam and some of their writings about how religion worked in coordination with the state. The other things that were happening at this time of the Enlightenment was that travel was much more prevalent. People were actually